Hey guys, Caleb here. Wanted to talk to you a little bit about terrain today. I'm going to introduce a brief series of videos that we're going to be doing here to sort of walk you through building a table. Now, if you're watching my other video, you'll know that I'm currently starting painting on a Space Marine army that I've called the Frost Giants that are a Space Wolf chapter. And for that army, I really want to have some terrain for them as well. I like to game a lot at home. I don't always have time to run out to the game store. It's all the way across town. And sometimes I'm just not in the mood. I want to stay at home. And if I want to have a friendly game here at the house, I definitely need to have some terrain down. I'm going to invite a friend over and have them over for a game. I don't want to be playing with them sort of marching their troops behind Coke cans and tissue boxes. You know, I want to actually have some terrain on the table. Now, I could buy GW terrain, which is wonderful looking terrain, or terrain from any of the other terrain manufacturers out there, like Battlefields in a Box by Gale Force 9, or dozens of other companies. But all of those boxes cost money. Now, they are pre-painted, so that saves me time, and that's valuable. But a basic GW kit's going to cost me $25 for just one building. I can break that up into smaller buildings, but it's not enough to cover a table. It'll easily cost me hundreds to build terrain for an entire table. And I just don't have that in my budget. I want to save some money. I'm willing to put in the time, but after I've bought all my models, I just don't want to shell out another couple $100s and hours of work to buy either prefabricated painted terrain or terrain that I have to build myself and then paint too. I'd rather just put in the work into something that I'm going to really love and really cherish, that's something that is close to me, something that I've picked and designed, that I'm not pasting together from a bunch of different kits that may or may not work for the terrain I want, and then I want to do it on a budget. So what we're proposing now is, today we're going to start on 10 terrain projects for $10 or less. So we're going to build an entire terrain board for $100. Now that's everything on your table. That's everything from the bottom up, and that's going to be 10 different pieces of terrain. And we're not just talking like little clumps of barrels here. We're talking area terrain. If we do little clumps of barrels, it's going to be a part of other clumps of barrels, or objectives, or barricades of barrels, or whatever it is we decide. So since I'm doing a Space Wolf army, I've decided I want to do a snowy board for terrain. Now, before we get started, we have to keep in mind that we only have $100, so we have to be pretty careful with this and how do we stretch this out. Specifically, we have to build 10 projects for $10 or less. Now, I could say I have $100 for the whole thing, buy a city sector, and break that up into pieces, but it wouldn't include basing materials or sand or flocking. It wouldn't include the paints to paint them, and it certainly wouldn't include the glue all that together, and it would probably be over $100. And additionally, that would only allow me to do a city. What if I want to do a frozen wasteland, or an alien planet, or a volcanic ash field, or a forest, or a high elf fortress, or whatever? I need to think outside the box a little bit. So for my snowy tundra wasteland, I've decided I want to stick into that sort of theme. Just like in my other video, I pointed out that you should always have a plan before you get started. I've created a sort of a plan for myself. Now, they're loose notes, and they don't have to be perfect, and I certainly don't have to stick to them entirely. But the plan is that I should sort of start with that, and if the project grows or changes, that's okay. So for this snowy board, I'm envisioning it in my mind, and I see, snow plumes and snowy hills where the snow has just blown across this plain. So there's icy plains and icy hills, and there's icy glaciers poking up out of the ground. Maybe there's some settlements there. Maybe there's some igloos from some of the native inhabitants, or maybe there's like a wigwam-like hut. Really, you could go anywhere with this. Because the Space Wolves on Fenris are such a Nordic Viking culture, you could really do that too. You could make some long houses, some neat houses, perhaps a treasure house, or whatever. So that's what we're going to go with. We're going to kind of go with a snowy, icy, Viking-esque theme for this sort of stuff. I'm going to assume that if you're watching this video, it's because you don't have a lot of experience building terrain. So we're going to start with something very, very simple that all terrain builders should really learn how to build. I always say it's the first thing you should learn how to build, is hills. So hills are nice and simple because you can hide behind them and your troops can climb over them. They provide both tiers and tiers for you to climb on and objects for you to hide behind. They provide cover. They provide height so you can look down and see other models. They're the perfect terrain, and every table should have a few. Now, there's two basic types of hills I like to think of. Now, you could argue that mountains are another type of hill, or impassables are a type of hill, but we're going to talk about two types of hills today: tiered and domed. Tiered hills are where the hills actually have layers to them and levels. They don't traditionally look very real. They're more deemed just to be functional, really. They have flat tops, flat surfaces where your models can stand. For the purpose of wargaming, on a wargaming table, they're great because they're at one time very scenic looking and very interesting, and the other time they're very versatile. They allow your models to stand on top or stand behind with very little difficulty and very little risk of tipping over. Additionally, big models can step on them and stand on them, and they work pretty well for that. The GW hills are kind of a decent example of that because they're pretty flat on top, they're pretty square on the sides, they're easy to hide behind, easy to hide on, and they're $25 a box. So I don't generally recommend buying that when you can build it for less than a couple dollars. To build your basic hill, you're going to need a few simple things. You're going to need some MDF, which is medium density fiberboard. You're going to need some foam. Usually I recommend some some insulation foam, which is very dense and very highly packed together. And you're going to need some sort of cutting implements. Now, with the MDF board, you could usually use something like a jigsaw or a handsaw. I recommend a jigsaw if you have one. It'll make it a lot faster. You also could use a wire or a hot wire cutter to cut through the foam. That costs you about $10, so for the purposes of our project, that's actually a little out of bounds right now. So we're going to assume you have something like a butter knife or a bread knife laying around. So we'll actually cut this project out of a bread knife. So we're going to walk you through all phases of the project. We're going to go to Home Depot, we're going to take a look around the store, we're going to buy the necessities we need, or we're at least going to price them so you know what they cost. And then when we come back here to the studio, we're going to put together a couple hills for the project so that you guys can see what it looks like. The other thing I'm going to recommend we pick up is some sort of filler compound, like tacky compound or stucco or wall compound. Anything that you use to plug up those picture holes when you move out of an apartment and your landlord's going to charge you for every single one of them. That stuff you put in there and then sand down, that's what we're looking for. So we're going to go to the store, we're going to get some MDF, some foam, we're going to get some sandpaper, and we'll probably get some of that stucco to shove in there and let it dry and smooth it out really nice. We're going to put all that together, and then we're going to make some hills out of that and paint it up for you. If you have some sand, go ahead and grab that. So why don't we start gathering supplies? Come on. Okay, so this is the first thing you want to do once you have your idea in place for your terrain board, and you can do the terrain board with anything you want. You could do an urban terrain board, a cityscape board, but for the purpose of this tutorial, we're going to do a snowy tundra sort of board. The first thing you're going to want is some sort of basing materials for your baseboard. Now, you can actually build your hills out of styrofoam or hard-packed polystyrene, and that works fine. The problem is, over time, the bottoms of those are going to sort of chip and break. You're going to see the styrofoam reveal itself. You're going to have to go back and do touch-ups. This is going to take a lot of time and a lot of work. The better solution is just to go ahead and do some hard baseboard now. You can use just about any basing material. The most common one probably used by wargaming enthusiasts is MDF, which stands for medium density fiberboard. And this is somewhere in between plywood and heavy sheet board. It's pretty inexpensive. You can get a sheet that's about 8 by 10, 8 or 10 feet long, usually about 8 feet and about 4 feet wide from your local do-it-yourself store like Home Depot or Lowe's, usually for about $10. Now, because this is 10 terrain projects for $10 or less, that in and of itself is the first $10, and you really wouldn't have enough money left over to go ahead and buy the styrofoam for the other projects. But really, for the purpose of this, for the $10 tutorial, you have to think of it as you buy the entire sheet, and you're going to be using that for all of the terrain. One sheet will do you all of the terrain, all the boards for the entire 10 projects. The same thing goes with the styrofoam. You're going to buy one heavy sheet of 1 or 2 inch foam, and that's going to be enough to do all 10 projects with. So really, if you think of it that way, if the sheets are $10 a piece, that's $20. Really, you're only spending about $2 of your material cost per project. That $20 broken over 10 projects is about $2 a project. So the reality is, although you're spending $20 up front for these two materials, your styrofoam and your board, that's the best $20 you're going to invest in the whole project, and everything else is going to be cheaper by comparison. This is probably the most you'll spend up front for the entire thing. So go ahead and shell out the $20 now. Go ahead and get that ready and get all your materials you need. I went ahead and marked up my boards. Getting it from the Home Depot, you're probably going to need to break it in half. The good news is medium density fiberboard is very, very thin. You can easily break it. If you talk to the gentlemen who work the wood area, they'll usually cut it for you. I think they usually do 1 or 2 cuts for free, and then they charge, I think, $0.25 after that. It's just as easy just to cut it at home. So really just have them cut it in half for you, or just break it in half. Even though it's going to be a little uneven, it's not going to be a big deal because you're just going to cut it up anyway. So let's take a look at what we went ahead and done. So I went ahead and mapped out the different projects we're going to be doing. If you take it from this vantage point, you can see there are almost a dozen or so different little terrain pieces on there. Another good idea is just to go ahead and label the pieces so that you know exactly what it is you're going to be building with each one. For example, we have our hill over here that we're going to use for snow. We have a snowy mound area. We've got an ice lake, some glaciers, igloos, barricades, forests, that sort of thing. So we know what every piece is designed for. You really want these to be kind of rounded on the edges. You don't want hard, solid lines. If you're building cities, then those nice square panels are good because they sort of represent the urban nature of a city block where it is nice and square and very symmetrical. This needs to be a little bit more organic, so you're going to see rounded shapes, kidney-shaped areas, that sort of thing. None of them need to be super big. Most of these are about 8 inches or so. Some of the smaller pieces I've actually, in between these, I've left with a question mark because I'm not for sure exactly what we're going to use it for, even if we are. But rather than waste this board, we're just going to go ahead and try to plug every single spot we can with these. Even if we don't use all these for this project, it's good to have these on hand for later terrain projects, because then if we just want to create a terrain project in an afternoon, we already have some MDF baseboards on hand. You could use other basing material too. If you don't have any MDF, you could use something like this. This is poster board. You can get this at just about anywhere from a Rite Aid to a CVS pharmacy or that sort of thing. It's about 1/4 inch thick, and basically it is a polystyrene center between 2 thin card. Now there's plenty of tutorials about how to use this and cut it and that sort of thing. The most important thing is it's cheap. You can get it for about $1 a sheet. Usually less if you go to somewhere like a dollar store or something like that. So this is the other half of the MDF board that we've got on hand, and we went ahead and mapped out some of these too for the later terrain projects. Now we've got some overlapping lines here, but again, that's not a big deal either, because ultimately this is all going to be painted over, primed over, based over, and terrain's going to be mounted on top. As long as you know exactly what you're doing with it, it's really okay. So we've got all of that mapped out. The next thing we're going to do is go ahead and cut these out with our saw. Once we get those cut out, we're going to sand them on the edges and bevel them so they're nice and smooth, and then we'll get back with you when we get done with that. So we went ahead and cut out all the different templates, and we went ahead and sanded them down and beveled the edges. Here's the ones for the first project we're going to work on. These are these snowy hills we talked about. The hills being the first thing you really ever want to do when you're making terrain. It's a nice, simple project. It's easy to learn on. So these are the bases. This is the MDF. As you can see, we've cut out the basic shapes sort of around the lines where they wanted. We've also beveled the edges. What beveling means is just sanding it so that there's an incline. Usually inclines around 45 degrees or so. It doesn't have to be much, doesn't have to be fancy, and it doesn't have to be perfect for what we're doing. Really, the important thing is that now this terrain will be on these hard bases, and then additionally it will stand the test amount of time, and it'll be able to go through many more games. So on top of these, we're going to actually build our hills. Let me just show you the other ones we're working on already. Go ahead and give you an idea. So these are the extra ones we went ahead and done. So as you can see, we've done dozens and dozens of these. We've got stuff for igloos and barricades and glaciers, and we've got well over 20 in here. We've got some big ones, we've got some small ones. We've changed some of the patterns up. We've got some in here for like a fire pit in here. And they're all nice and beveled and sanded. It took a couple hours, but it's well worth the time. I've also gone ahead and thrown in some frame pieces in this bin, just so I have some extra stuff in case I decide I want to work with it. Like I've got these pieces I got free out of a Battle from Across set, I think. And I've got these Christmas trees that I told you about. We're going to use those for a project later on. But for now, I've just got all these ready, so we're ready to go. These are the ones we're going to be using first, obviously. So now we've got these, the next thing we're going to need is some insulation foam. Okay, so what we're doing is we've got our foam, and the foam comes in these large sheets. And then what you're going to do is you're going to draw out your basic shape on this sheet. Now a good way to do that is to start by just taking your basic shape like this, pressing it up against this, and just drawing it out, just tracing it on there. What you're going to get is a shape slightly larger than this. You're going to cut it out until you get the same basic shape. So as you can see here, These shapes are very, very closely together. They are actually almost exactly the same size. The way you get that is a combination. You can either, one, use a basic knife, like a butter knife or a bread knife, something, that's way too sharp. Something like this, which is a bread knife. This will cut through foam pretty easily. For example, if I was going to try to cut out a shape, I can just easily saw right through it like it's nothing. And I can follow a pretty good guideline that way. Now the kick is you're not going to get a super even surface. That's okay because we're going to sand that out later. But you are going to kick up a lot of dust doing that. So what's recommended a lot of times is to use something like this, which is a hot wire knife. Now these come in a lot of different varieties. The bottom line is that it's an electrical device that a electrical current or charge runs through this thin wire. You can get a styrofoam cutter like this at most hobby stores for give or take about $10. These are a little outdated. They're not really used that widely anymore because they don't deliver a lot of current. That thing runs on just regular battery power. This runs on regular alternating current, which is just you plug it into your electrical outlet. You can pick this up at a hardware store or a Michael's craft store for about $20. It's a pretty good investment, but for this sort of project where you're trying to save money and you don't have a lot of money to burn, we're trying to do 10 projects under $10, you're probably not going to be able to afford this right now. If you have the money to spend, it's a great investment. Basically the way it works is you plug it in and there's an on-off switch. Once you turn this thing on, electrical current is going to start to run up and down this line very, very, very quickly. So if I can get it closer so you guys can have a better look at this thing. So as you can see, it's very, very thin. Current's running through this now. So what's going to happen is once you put it up to this sort of styrofoam and you push into it, it's going to start to melt it. You can see it actually melting right through there. Now this is going to kick up some fumes and some odor, so you're not going to want to do this in an enclosed environment, especially for a long period. If you do have to do it indoors, like if it's cold outside or it's raining or whatever, just be sure to get plenty of ventilation, take breaks, wear a breath mask, a cloth over your mouth, or a breathing mask if you have one. You can usually pick up breathing masks in most hardware stores for give or take a couple dollars, not much at all. Or just simply take a bandana, wrap it around your mouth, maybe dip it in some water to sort of create an insulating barrier. That works okay. Once you've got your basic shape cut out with your hot knife, which isn't going to take too long, or with your butter knife, you're going to take a piece of sandpaper and you're going to sand it down till it's smooth. So for example, this one right here, now that we've got the basic shape on there, we're just going to take a piece of sandpaper and start to smooth it down. Now, like I said earlier, this is going to kick up a lot of dust. You can see it flying through the air. So once this dust starts to kick up, it's going to get into your lungs. So wear a breath mask if you think of it, or something like that. You're going to smooth this down until it's smooth on the side. See how that's starting to smooth out right there? And you're going to bevel it a little bit. Just a little bit at the top. Just try to sand it a little bit more. And you're going to start to see that wear down. Eventually, you're going to get to the point, in a few minutes, that it's going to be pretty smooth. Like this is one we did earlier. And you can see here that it's very, very smooth on the sides, and it's nice and beveled. You can see how it's nice and level right there on the side. Now this is okay for a start, but you want to really build this up. So you're going to start to do layers. So in the same way we did it before, you're going to take some insulation foam, you're going to put it on top, you're going to trace a pattern, and you're going to start to build this up a little bit. So now we've got a second layer here. You can see how we've added it on there. You've got the first layer, second layer. It's twice as high. This is now about the same height as a Space Marine, so it's a perfect barrier against shooting attacks, that sort of thing. We went ahead and traced this out and smoothed it out and measured it out on top so it's nice. Now the first thing that you're going to notice is that it's not completely flush with the sides. We're going to try to make it smaller as it goes up for two reasons. One, it creates a more natural hill. It's going to get thinner at the top, wider at the bottoms. Two, if we decide that we want to fill this in on the side, which we are going to do, to make it look like a natural snowdrift, then we're going to actually want that sort of beveled edge to sort of make a nice, simple, smooth surface. So that's our first two levels. We're going to build this up with about 2 or 3 levels, maybe a couple more levels. So eventually when this is up at 3, maybe 4 levels high, it's going to be a nice hill, nice and tall and even. And then we're going to use filler to fill in the sides. We're going to let that dry. We're going to smooth that out too. So rather than show you all that, we're just going to show you the end result here. So I'm going to go ahead and cut out a couple more layers of this. Like I said, take it, get some spare foam, start to trace out a pattern, get a basic feel for it, cut this out, and then put that on top. Once you get this to a height that you're comfortable with and you're satisfied with, glue those all together like a cake, like layers of a cake. Any sort of heavy glue will do. Liquid nail is what I recommend. One, because it's cheap. You can get a tube of liquid nail for give or take about $3 or $4. Now, if you live at home and your dad works in, let's say, a construction or anything like that, or even has a basic workshop, he probably has a tube of this laying around. This is caulk, C-A-U-L-K. You can get something like this. This is a tube of actually liquid nails. And a caulk gun, you can buy that entire thing in Walmart for about $5. Caulk gun is about $1.50. This is about $3, so tax $5. This is the strongest glue you're going to get for this sort of project stuff. If you don't have that, some basic white glue, some Elmer's glue you have. If you're trying to do this project for a reasonable price, like we're saying under $10, you're probably going to want to look around and see what you have around your house. If you have some wood glue, if you have some Elmer's glue around the house, that's what you use because you're trying to save money here. If you have a couple extra dollars, invest in a caulk gun with some liquid nail because it's going to be useful for you. So we'll come back to you once we have these couple layers leveled out, once we've got all the hills glued together. Before we apply the caulk to it, before we apply any of the filler solution, we'll come back and show you where we're at. Hey guys, welcome back. So we've got our hills all constructed. The foam has been cut, it's been glued down, it's on the medium density fiberboard. And the basic structure of the hills is complete. As we said, we're going to make two, so we've got two different hills here. The first is the simple tiered hill. It's just 3 levels, all stacked on top of each other like a plate of pancakes. The second one is the same basic structure, but I've been divided it into 2. That way you can see where it's got some space in between where figures can move or take some cover, that sort of thing. Just to give you a sense of scale, I got a marine here. Let's take a closer look. So here's a basic space marine on top of one of these hills, and pulling back we can see there he stands. As you can see, the hill is more than big enough to give him certain cover. He is standing behind the hill, over there he is, behind the hill. He has no shot on him, so it's a great little cover thing, and now he becomes revealed. So this thing stands, give or take, about, I think about 2 inches, 3 inches high, about 3 inches high. Over here, same basic scenario. He's got some cover. He could stand up here, depending on where you are. He may have cover against your attacks. And when he's behind the hill, he certainly is completely on cover. All you see is a little sword poking out. So that works pretty well. So now that they're fully assembled, the next thing we're going to do is apply some plaster to them, just to sort of smooth them over. You're not going to do this with every hill project, but because these are snowy hills, and I want them to look more like snow drifts than hills, what I'm going to do is apply some of this plaster to it. Now this is standard patching plaster. This is what you would use to cover up holes in your home after you take pictures, or after you hang pictures and want to cover back up with painting. It's got a thick, talky consistency, almost like, I don't really know what I can compare this with. Oatmeal, I suppose, would be about the consistency of it. You can get a whole jar of this stuff and give or take about $5. Because this project, we're trying to save some money. Check your dad's garage or shed, or check with a neighbor, or maybe an art instructor at the school. Just borrow it. You don't need the whole tub. You're only going to need a little bit for this project. So although it is only about $5, we're trying to save a little bit of money right now. So instead of buying it, just borrow it from somebody. You probably won't use that much of it. Most of the time, if you haven't used it in a while, it's pretty dry, so be sure to give it a good stir. This paint stir stick comes free with any gallon of paint. In fact, if you just go into most do-it-yourself stores and you just tell them, hey, I need a couple paint stirs, they'll usually provide them free of charge. Especially if you say something like, I just went ahead and bought a gallon of paint yesterday, I forgot these. Most of the time, they're not going to care, especially places like Walmart or Target. Where they sell paint. If you go somewhere like Home Depot or Lowe's, probably the same scenario. Or just get a stick. Go in your backyard, grab a stick, clean it off. Just be sure to take the bark off, otherwise you're going to get bark down in the stuff, and that's going to create texture you may not want. So what we're going to do, now that these are sanded down, we're going to go ahead and apply some patching plaster in the places that we want to cover the gaps. So there's a couple different approaches to this. You don't want to put on too much because it's really very dense stuff. It's very heavy. It's going to weigh it down a lot. So you're not going to want to apply it too much all at one time. Apply it in little bits here and there. Just apply it just enough to get the basic shape you want. So if you want this to be kind of a rounded shape, apply patching plaster to the side so that it is rounded. This stuff takes about 12 hours to dry completely. And the more you pile on, the longer it takes, of course, and the temperature will affect that if it's hot or cold. So just be sure to don't be liberal with it. Be conservative. Use only what you need. And remember, it's okay to make mistakes because at the end of the day, we're just going to paint over this with some white paint. So it's not going to look like patching plaster right now. It's going to look a little odd. But when we're done with it, it's going to be different. The other important thing to remember is if you want your figures to be able to stand all over this thing, remember anywhere you put patching plaster, it's basically going to be very difficult to have your troops stand. So I like to think of it as sort of go from the side. So imagine, let's say you're in a wintry area like a winter, like up north in the Arctic. Imagine a sort of a northern wind blows and it blows the snow in from, let's say, north to south. So all the snow's got to pile up in one general direction. So maybe just apply it to one side of it. So for this example, on this one, this side over here is a little more uneven than this side. So we're going to actually apply it in this direction so that it's more covered over here. We're going to leave most of the top blank, so leave us a standing area, and we're going to leave some of these areas over here nice and open. Over here, we're probably just going to do it on the sides a little bit, but we're going to try to leave some of these tiers open for Marines and for troops to stand on. So just keep it in mind, good terrain is both aesthetic, it looks nice, and it's versatile. It can be used in the game. These are good basic starting pieces. They got a good strong base, good strong pieces. So we're going to go from there. I can see, just looking at this area over here is kind of a lot more square than I originally wanted, and that's because I ended up cutting this piece of foam, a scrap piece of foam, rather than getting a full rounded piece the way I normally would have. But that's okay, you can fix that. So what you can do is you can just add the patching plaster here to sort of disguise that. You can see here this edge is actually a little of this plastic coming off of it that I didn't entirely rip off. That's okay too. You can go ahead and rip it off now. You make that sort of error, or you can cover it up with a patching plaster as well. Really, at this stage of the game, terrain is very mutable. You can have a lot of fun with it. You can make some beginning mistakes with it, and it's not a big deal. I've been doing this for a long time, and you can see I still get excited about a project, but I rush, and I forget to do these sort of little things. So let's go ahead and apply some patching plaster to this so you can actually see how this goes on. I'll try to position the camera in a way that you'll be able to see everything. Let's take a look. That's not too bad.